welcome everybody to CCWT's webinar today. We have two guest speakers. We have Anderson Lee and Jim Mallory. We are excited to welcome them. Sorry for the mix-up with whether the webinar was started or not. So let me just introduce these two wonderful gentlemen. Anderson Lee is a senior manager at CompTIA, where he has established partnerships with community-based organizations, employers, and stakeholders within the greater Chicago area's IT ecosystem since 2017. His experience includes encouraging first-generation college students like himself to apply for internships and supporting job seekers eager to re-enter the workforce after earning certifications in IT. He's a current member of the Chicagoland Chamber of Commerce's Technology Council and serves on the Richard J. Daley College's IT Advisory Board. He is a proud product of the New York City Public Schools, and he holds a bachelor's from Northwestern University and a master's from Columbia University. And then we have Professor James Mallory, who has degrees in engineering technology and information technology and has consulted for companies such as Kodak, Xerox, and Mobile. He holds numerous technical certifications in the areas of programmable controllers, hardware, networking, and cybersecurity. His experience includes teaching and developing curriculum in engineering technology, information technology, and cybersecurity for several colleges. His expertise includes the Internet of Things, or IoT, modern applied technologies, and developing training for deaf and hard of hearing students to pass industrial IT certifications such as CompTIA's A+, Network Plus, and Security Plus. Professor Mallory has also developed classes, boot camps, and other training which prepare disabled students, such as deaf and hard of hearing individuals, for the technical workforce. Thank you so much for being here with us today, both of you. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to you. And for our guests, I am going to enable the chat function so that at the end, when we have the Q&A, you can unmute yourself. And I'm going to put a link to an evaluation in the chat as well, so that if you have to duck out a little early, because I know we're all busy, you can do an evaluation for us, but you will get that in a link in an email as well. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jim and Anderson. Thank you both so much.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Missy, for that very gracious introduction. And Jim and I are both grateful to CCWT for inviting us to share our presentation with you and our guests here, especially on a Friday afternoon. So thank you so much. Welcome to DeafTEC Ready, Unlocking Potential Among the Deaf and Hard of Hearing. And when I presented this in person back in November at the University of Wisconsin, unable to join me at the time was Professor Jim Mallory, who really led several major components of this partnership with RIT NTID, which was the assessment, training, completion, and certification aspect of the program. So since Jim's been kind enough to take some time out of his schedule, especially while he's on sabbatical, I'll turn it over to Jim, who'd be more than happy to cover some of those pieces with us today.
Okay, thanks, Anderson. I'm going to go ahead and share screen. Can you all do a little? Had a lot of fun with Anderson and the group.
Looks
we did
good.
a camp, so you can see everything. You can hear me okay?
Mm-hmm.
We're all good. Okay, so I got just a couple slides with some demographic and some stats on it. Then I don't want this to be death by PowerPoint, so I have a lot of pictures and stories, and we'll have some fun. But one of the things at the beginning was why develop a technical boot camp for deaf and hard of hearing? At our institute, we have degrees. My department's associate degrees is what we specialize in. We thought, what if we can get people in 10-week boot camp to get certified? And so that was a thing. So in general, we're going to give you links to this because I'm going to fly through some of these slides. there's definitely a gap still between hearing and deaf in the workforce. And I on the screen, I show you some statistics. There's still a gap, and that's what we're working on. Um, and if you do a literature search, you can see that in a lot of cases, they're getting lower level jobs when they shouldn't be if they have the proper training. So that's what Anderson and I were, and the rest of the crew that was on board with us were focusing on. So from my perspective, okay, we have a great relationship now with CompTIA, but why there's so many certifications out there, Novell and you know, Amazon and Google and all kinds. We thought we liked CompTIA because they're vendor neutral and they're stackable. Um, and what we're finding out at NTID is, you know, the employers oftentimes the certifications are more valuable than a 2-year degree. So we're saying, why not have both with our students? So, um, and so basically the logistics of our boot camp, it was an NSF grant, and Donna Lang and Brian Traeger and I worked on it. And basically the money paid to fly students from all over the country in, and they stayed on campus in the dorms in the summer for 10 weeks. They have food, and you know, it's pretty much they were immersed in it, which turned out to be good because when they go back home, there's too many distractions, you know, jobs, kids, relatives. Here, they were very focused. So it was a boot camp, and the students used to tease instead of doing push-ups when they come to class, I make them do like memory dumps on paper. So that kind of became the joke. But here's the logistics. Who did what? I was a technical guy, developed the instruction, hired one of my former students who's now a professor, Michael Barrios, and we had a blast. And then, of course, Anderson and the crew from CompTIA consulted with Jeff Mell a little bit because we teach the same thing. And Anderson came on campus quite a few times and was a huge factor in the boot camp. So basically, the process, about 60 applicants applied. We interviewed 20 and accepted 12. They took the Wonderlic assessment test, which I think you do there at CompTIA. And then we did personal interviews with each of the students. And Brian and I would interview them, and Donna was in the background. And the three of us decided who would get in. I was telling Anderson the top 10 were easy. The numbers 11, 12, we had quite a bit of interaction who would get in, but none of them had a technical background. And there's from across the U.S., we ended up with 12 deaf or hard of hearing in the boot camp. One of them was deaf blind, which I wasn't planning on, but turned out to be a wonderful experience. We had 2 women and 10 men, and they varied in age and ethnic backgrounds. Uh, and so it was quite a diverse population. There's a picture of Anderson with our crew, and the one lady that came has a hearing dog, and so it became part of the crew, and it was a lot of challenges, but a great time. So communication was the main thing. Like I sign in SimCom when I'm signing, meaning I talk and sign at the same time. And this is the breakdown, as you can see on the screen. And really, there's kind of 3 categories. Some students that have cochlear implants, you know, they can just talk and use voice. And some students prefer SimCom, both voice and using sign language. And some prefer pure ASL. So it's impossible for one person to do all of those. So I taught to the middle in SimCom, and that's how we rolled with it. And we had to have special interpreters for the deaf blind. Anderson, feel free to jump in with any comments. So before the boot camp, we just had a big barbecue and everybody met everybody. And we had all these plans, A, B, C in place in case something happened, and A, B, and C happened. So, so I'll get into that in a minute. This is basically the layout of the boot camp. We had 10 weeks of classes, 7 hours a day. The first half of the day was more, we'd have direct instruction, and then second half we'd have labs and interactive activities. My lectures never lasted more than 20 minutes, and we'd launch right into activities, which I'll show you. But that kind of shows you the breakdown of what we did. You know, a lot of games and different things to keep it interesting. And we had a weekly plan, and after 5 weeks, they would take core 1, and then the second 5 weeks, core 2. And at our associate degree level, it was equivalent to 5 of our college level classes: PC hardware, Windows OS, Linux, network essentials, and help desk support. So we crammed a lot in there, and we were wondering if it could be done. And here's my teaching philosophy. You see lectures at the top. Uh, I don't want to be death by PowerPoint lectures. Nobody wants to sit through a boring lecture. So usually about 20 minutes of instruction and boom, right to the interactive stuff. And wherever possible, because ASL is a lot of these students' first language. Like if you understand it, okay, now you explain it. So I would explain it in SimCom and have them explain it, which are the teaching pyramid. That's helping them as well as the people they're teaching to. So
Hey,
we
Jim,
also had yeah,
back up a little bit for a moment. When you
sure.
were assessing the applicants, what were you looking for in them?
That's an easy question. Grit. I would summarize it one word: grit. I want somebody that they have a burn, they have the desire to succeed, and they're willing to get in and do the work. And one of the questions on the interview was, a lot of people fail this the first time. Are you stubborn? Do if things don't go right, do you keep going anyway? And I'm say, yeah, yeah, yeah. So, but communication, it didn't matter, what, if they're pure ASL or they're SimCom, that was not a bias. The Oscar was one of our blind gentlemen, was one of the top 10, and that threw me a curveball because I hadn't really worked with that many deaf blind. So I was had a little anticipation going into that, but it turned out to be a wonderful experience. So,
Cool.
and so basically we set up study teams. So we had things in the classroom, but at night they would go home and we would have study groups. So we had whiteboards in the dorms. They could ask me questions on WhatsApp. We use asynchronous questions. Things would pop up. They don't want to wait till the next day to get their question answered. So I was available pretty much, 12, except for when I was sleeping. I always check WhatsApp and answer questions and things on weekends because they needed their questions answered pretty quickly because everything was so condensed. So that worked out pretty well. And here's my philosophies. We worked their rear ends off. We kept the bar high, and we had a lot of fun. Everybody in the boot camp worked their butts off and had fun, and that was one of the main things. Um, Okay, communication challenges. So that I'm starting out with some challenges here. Um, a lot of us developing rapport, the different communication styles. We had a deaf blind gentleman, so how are we going to deal with that? And students had to physically, touch him to work, communicate, and we had deaf. It was a learning curve on my part working with the deaf blind interpreters because I would sign and they would reverse sign. So the first week was kind of debugging that, and then um, COVID was a factor. We were planning, everybody had to have their shots. And then, what if this happens? What if that happens? What if one of them gets COVID? Well, week one, I ended up with COVID. You know, so the first week we had to do a shift. My this is a screen capture of our Zoom meeting. So I'm working from home, and my assistant right next to me with the thumbs up, Michael, he was just there as he had to take over right away, and we didn't miss a step. We kept going. So we already had this plan with they call it a high flex. You can do on campus or off campus and combine them, and that's our meeting. So as myself and two other students had COVID. So trying to remember which one. So anyway, three of those students on the screen are in their dorm room, and I'm in my home, and everybody else is in class, and we didn't miss a beat. So this all our preparations paid off.
Jim?
So this is our this. Yes,
Hey,
sir.
Jim. I know
Yes,
that
sir.
this is going to seem second nature to you, but this was completely new to me. Could you describe the mask that Michael had on for our fellow attendees? Because it was
Sure.
sure a learning experience for me.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is the classroom, and this is the first week. And again, I'm the lead teacher, and I'm home. This was my assistant, Michael. He is awesome. He took over. You notice the clear mask because a lot of these students depend on lip reading. So you can't have a mask like this. You're not going to be able to read lips. So all our interpreters in us, we faculty, we had um, clear masks. And there's Michael talking to me through the monitor, and the students, you can see on the student's monitor right here in the foreground, they're watching me. So I'm teaching remotely, and then Michael's running the simulation. And like I said, we didn't miss a beat. So that was pretty good. And there's Michael. That's our thing. It's always thumbs up. And the students are working. You see in the background, they're working on the whiteboard. Looks like they're working on hard drives there and different parts of the computer. And there's my assistant smiling as usual. And students are learning and interacting and having fun. And let's see. Okay, so here's the next slide is the room setup. We had like rows. And with the deaf blind student, after like a week, we're like, this isn't working. So we pivoted and we changed it to this more of a U shape, like a rectangle or a U. And so you can see over here on the left, this it's our deaf blind student with his interpreter. So everything has to be refocused. And people think, well, how does this apply to me? I don't work with deaf students or blind students. If you develop good instruction for somebody who's deaf, then it's good instruction for everyone. So that's a reason to learn it. So here's an example. On the left is one of our boot camp students, and we're talking about hard drives and defragging and things like that. So I'm all up to the whiteboard. Come up to the whiteboard, show me this, show me that. You understand? Great. Now show me, draw it. And on the right is one of the ladies working on the different things. So anyway, we just use whiteboards. I'm all about whiteboards. Yeah, there's a lot of multimedia instruction, but I want them physically signing, explaining, and writing. And so here's another example of a concept. They're working on something. And there's a gentleman over here in the right interacting. In the class, it was wonderful. Their interaction with the deaf blind student was fine, was worked out really well. So here's an example. The classroom, you could see they're all holding up signs. And well, I would have questions. Instead of just answer, I make it write it down because that helps your brain when you write things down. And it was fun because they got their personalities into the answer. Over here on the right, for example, his answer was Bluetooth. So you can see this gentleman over here had a picture of a smile with one of the blue teeth. And they come up with some crazy fun stuff. It made it a lot of fun. And here's some more examples. Oh, like, so on the right, you can see, oh, upgrade, roll back my stormtrooper. And on the left, this is her acronym. We developed a lot of acronyms. The young lady on the left, we developed acronyms together because there's so much information with Core 1 and Core 2. It's an overwhelming amount of information. So we develop a lot of acronyms to help them remember it. And so there's her acronym. Grandma done put raisins in my cookies. That helps her remember cookie permissions. And this gentleman on the left, he was a Star Wars fanatic. He loved Star Wars. And so, that's what he said, built to safe mode, my lord. And, this guy was a graphic artist. He always had. And here's let's see, that they were excited because the blue screen of death, like, oh, right, they finally got the blue screen of death that we were talking about. It's one thing to talk about the blue screen of death. It's another thing to see it on your monitor when you're completely disabled. And so this guy, he liked to take his skateboard to class every day. Topic was IoT. So I got an IoT biometric watch. So we tracked him and his heart rate and his speed when he would come to class. And that was a lot of fun with the IoT stuff. And here's one we were discussing. Here's another example where, okay, it doesn't matter if it's a deaf student or not. Here's a movie. The topic was studying, multiple cores and instructions. So here's a picture. Here's a movie, and they're demonstrating dual core. Two people writing instructions and two people racing for the next one. And this is how we taught. It was not boring lecture. We were constantly doing interactive things and keeping it. And people like, oh my gosh, how did you do this 7 hours a day? We did it. But you keep it light. And another thing, okay, I'm an old hearing guy. Okay, a lot of these are young deaf guys. So wherever possible, I would get out of the way and let somebody else. So here's a gentleman. Um, this is uh, this is David Johnson showing. He's a deaf technician. So any chance they have, here, David, come here, talk about this, talk about that. So they had wonderful role models where ASL is their first language. And here's another gentleman. He has a lot of expertise, one of our faculty, Ed Lucas in IoT. The gentleman on the right is the deaf-blind interpreter. And so, and then in addition to technical training, Anderson was wonderful coming in. And this is a remote webinar we did with Nicole. What was her last name, Anderson? Great.
Maceberg.
Yeah.
Maceberg.
Yeah. So she's doing a lecture on resume writing, and everybody's in the classroom. And you see, we have an interpreter there. And so she was remote also. And here's a classroom that Anderson was in, and I forgot we were working on, but you see, there's Anderson with his clear mask talking, and next to Anderson is an interpreter. Okay, and here's a student asking a question, and off to the right, you see there's our deaf-blind student with his interpreter. So there was a lot of moving parts to this. I don't know, Anderson, you want to comment on that, the moving parts?
That must have been mock interview prep day, because I see someone's wearing a certain tie up front.
Yeah,
and,
yeah.
You know, I don't miss wearing those masks, but wearing those clear ones, it was like getting a steam facial after every visit.
Yeah. So and
Good
this is just
times.
more examples of writing things on the whiteboard. We went down into the basement looking at the cables. They're talking about plenum cables and PVC. So we go down there and actually in the basement look at the stuff. On the left, here's a picture of one of the participants interacting with our deaf-blind student, and he was very much a part of it. And also on the right, actually, it's our deaf-blind student interacting with the other students. He couldn't read always what's on the board. He'd have to get up real close, but that people would interpret for him, and he was amazing. Here's the deaf-blind interpreters. Again, they have an app they could picture with their phone that would change it into the proper contrast, because a lot of these questions we had were just objects on a screen. Here's another example, the whiteboard we posted. That's a motherboard. Okay, show me, where's the PCI slots, where's the CPU, blah, blah, blah. And we'd get them up there. And this was interview time. It was Professor Mallory giving him a full Windsor tie lesson. So we were up there having fun tying ties and
I think
okay,
the
this
yellow
next
one I brought.
yeah.
I brought some with me.
Yeah,
I think
that
that
was
yellow
awesome.
one is mine.
That's funny. Yeah, that was a lot of fun. And a lot of them never wore a tie before, and that's all right. This is one of my favorite things. This is towards the end of the boot camp. We have 2 rooms, whiteboards all the way around. And so when one of the challenges was, like one group would be certified, and we have like a week left, and the other ones are still working on it. Well, how do you keep the ones that certified already? Their job was to create uh, a, a hall of fame, all of the things that they learned. So this is like from core 1 and core 2. You walk around the room, it starts sequentially from core 1 all the way around core 2, and everybody had to explain it. So this entire room, and people were amazed. Even when classes started, they left the stuff on the side because people, oh, it was a museum, not Wall of Fame. It was an A+ museum. So that was pretty amazing. I think I'll show you some more detailed pictures in a minute. This is another thing. A lot of it was about relationships. I mean, we had the glue where there was challenges, people frustrated. We had the relationships that was the glue that kept them in there. And here's Anderson having lunch with the crew, and we showed him how to use some apps on his phone for
Yes.
large. And so that was good fun. And here's Anderson talking to I'm sorry, there's Anderson talking to one of the students using the app. Okay, and people say barriers. Anderson doesn't know sign language. There's no interpreter there, but it's like that doesn't have to stop you, right, Anderson? I mean,
No, that was something I learned from the students, and that stopped me
and they've
from always looking for you if I needed help.
That's all right. They enjoyed that too. So here's one of our students asking, "Geez, when did you start with CompTIA?" And reminiscing over things. And here's Anderson talking to our deaf blind student with no interpreter using apps. And so that was pretty. So this is stuff not in the classroom. So learning was happening even at lunch. I mean, there was always a learning environment. And then week 7, we had 8 students pass core 1, 4 who were still working on it. So we had to divide out. My assistant took one group, I took another group. And then Amy Cardell and Nancy Hammervick came and visited us. And Amy was like, these students have been doing this for 7 weeks. They need a break. So she took this whole crew and we involved Amy in some of the game. Here she's playing Vanna White. We had a Jeopardy review game on Unix. So that was a lot of fun. She was fun to work with too. She would come up and we would do our dog and
Yeah.
pony show, and the students loved it. Students loved it, and I
Our
think Amy had
former
fun.
our former chairwoman of the board, no less.
Really, she's good.
Yeah,
She was fun. She was fun, and she actually appeared on Wheel of Fortune or something. She was telling the students
that
they
is
were impressed
correct.
with. They were impressed. And Nancy, we gave Nancy Hammervick a sign name, so the students went through this process, and they had one of the ladies, the older ladies in the class, tell Nancy how they came up with this name for her. That was fun. And again, it's about rapport building. We went to lunch too with Amy and Nancy. And then Amy took us to Niagara Falls, and what a blast. And they needed a break, but this is a boot camp. They had to do group activities. They're like, wow, you're a real taskmaster. Yeah, I am. All the way down, we had groups of 3 quizzing each other. I had the ones that passed core 1 quizzing the ones that hadn't passed core 1, all the way down. On the way back, they got to relax. But so for an hour and a half, because it's cutting into our class time, but we needed the break, they did quizzing on the way down. And then we just unplugged and had an absolute blast. So here's a group at Niagara Falls led by Amy. And then afterwards, we went and she treated us all to some hamburgers. And here's Amy having ice cream interacting with our deaf blind student through an interpreter. And, our students clowning it up on some of them, here's just a typical example of the fun we had. These guys hamming it up. And so the results from the 12 participants at the end of the boot camp, 8 were certified. And then we had 2 certified after the boot camp. 1 more should be soon. So basically, and 1 just gave up after the boot camp. He's like, I'm done. So basically, 11 out of 12, by the time we get done, should be certified. And one of the big things was not only the boot camp, and I talked about this, we're setting it up. The follow-up is important because people have different digestive time. This is not unique to deaf and hard of hearing. Some people could handle that in 12 weeks. Some people could handle it, but not in the 10 weeks. They needed more digestion time. So afterwards, I got some other grants, and we had a high flex classroom where they were now remote and we were local and different things. And so, so when we get done, hopefully 11 out of 12 will be passed. And there's the first 2 to get certified. So it's kind of like the first person that broke the 4-minute mile. It can be done. And these 2 did it, and its success just started rolling, and they built on success of others. And so now that certification was over, I got to keep these guys certified busy for another week. So here's Oscar, a gentleman, deaf blind gentleman. I made him like do a layout, topology of our networks in our labs. And here's Oscar explaining topology in our labs. You notice there's an interpreter behind him, always touching his back. So he's signing to us. We have the deaf blind interpreter behind him, following him around and helping him. So he knows where he is spatially and everything. And there's Greg the ham. He's talking about his network. So I had them each do a different room, and then they had to put everything on the museum, the A+ museum. And here's one of our students. They did a really nice job. I don't know if you saw with the museum. And here's one of the funny things. They didn't know the difference between 1D and 3D. So on the left, 1D is the stick figure on the board, and 3D is on his head, showing that he's 3D. And just lots of pictures. This is all from the museum. He has a Star Wars theme, of course, to explain his concepts. And there's a young lady who, this is cool. The pig represents how they remembered the port numbers. Hot roasted infected pig hops down some two-way streets faking. That's all the port numbers they need to know. And so you expand that acronym into the different port numbers. And that's how they remembered. That's how we got them to remember all this information. We had some really funny stories and acronyms, and there it is pictorially. And all of this helped the remaining students, some of them get through core one, the more experienced students now teaching the other students. Again, sometimes the best thing I could do is get out of the way. Just set it up. Now you do it. And here's kind of a learning pit, which I think is very appropriate. When the students get to weeks 4 or 5, it's pretty tough. So it's just getting them up that hill. And we talk about that. And there's the result. All the 100%, 12 out of 12 pass boot camp, and 11 out of or 10 out of 12 are now certified, and 11 out of 12 should be certified. And it changed what we're doing at NTID because we're government funded. Our dean has to go to Congress and justify our support because the deaf students don't pay full tuition. And if the deaf student can go through a 10-week boot camp and get a job, that counts the same to Congress as going through a 2-year degree and getting a technical job. So it's a lot less expensive, better return on their money, and so on. So that definitely did kind of a paradigm shift with what we're doing at NTID, and make new friends like Anderson and the rest. And we're just having a lot of fun. So that's my spiel. Anderson, I don't know, you want to
Yeah, if I
add
could
anything?
just, thank you, Jim. I'm smiling because I truly enjoyed that trip down memory lane from 2 summers ago. And if I can just contextualize all the work that was covered, all the effort, if you're new to tech and you are taking our A+ certification from scratch, you are essentially taking in 6 months of what you would learn in an entry-level role in 10 to 12 weeks. And on
Yeah.
top of that, unknown to most is, although we are a certifying organization, our certifications aren't given to those that just go through a particular program. You actually need to complete and pass 2 proctored examinations at a testing center, which can be anxiety inducing for anybody, not just the deaf and hard of hearing. And that just gives you a little more context into what these students overcame in just a short period of time under the steady hand and guidance of Jim. So, Jim, to this day, thank you.
Oh, my pleasure. A lot of it too is a language. I know Randy Gross has been big when we started working years ago to simplify the language. Like these students who ASL is their first language in English, some of them is their third or fourth language. Like I had a Chinese gal who passed, and a student would be like, which one of these choices is least desirable? She's like, what are they talking about? I said, which is the worst one? Oh,
Mm-hmm.
or starting from scratch, blah, blah, blah. The student's like, what does that mean, starting from scratch? So it's in ASL, some of the things just don't translate as well. So a lot of it is, just picking out key words. What do they mean? And so it's not just technical challenges, test approaches and, challenges like that.
Mm-hmm. Can you back up one slide to the graduation picture, please?
Sure.
All right, perfect. And then I'll begin the placement piece. I still remember the date, August 5th. It was a Friday afternoon. And it was, by all accounts, a very festive occasion, and deservedly so. The students deserved that with all the work that they had put in. Meanwhile, as much as I try to take that all in myself, I was also very nervous because for me, and I was a little envious of Jim because I thought his part was done. I thought now the hard part begins, placing these students into paid entry-level training related roles. So if I can, Jim, could you please stop sharing so I can bring up my
Oh,
slide
I'm
deck,
sorry.
please? No, it's all good. That's a great picture to have up.
You're walking me down memory lane, and I was kind of still there. There you go.
Perfect. All right, I'll just share my screen. Wonderful. Can you see my screen beginning with our logo?
Yes.
All right, perfect. So now that Jim's covered three vital components of the DeafTEC Ready program, the assessment piece, the training piece, and of course, the certification piece, the last part was the placement aspect. And when we talk about placement in this particular context, we're talking about entry-level roles related to tech. And generally speaking, the A+ certification prepares you for roles as either a help desk technician or a desktop support analyst. In layperson's term, that individual you call whenever your computer doesn't work, you need an upgrade, you've forgotten your password. These are the types of issues that the students Jim work with were taught to resolve. So the CompTIA A+ exam, not only does it cover many technical details, but there's actually a section devoted to soft skills, active listening, troubleshooting theory, simply because those are the aspects that really make someone successful in these types of roles. They're client-facing roles, which sort of basically sets up an immediate challenge. The deaf and hard of hearing in client-facing roles where they need to not only engage those facing tech problems, but then they have to resolve these issues and then, of course, explain them. So this is not someone in a back office position. This is not someone glued to a computer doing graphic design, coding. It's someone who's been prepared to face the public, and not only that, engage the public. So there's a challenge right from the get-go. Best practices. In my experience, this is the first time I had only ever worked with a deaf and hard of hearing student. Before coming to CompTIA, when I worked in higher ed, I had one experience. And basically, the student came for career advising. An interpreter accompanied the student. And my simple instruction was just talk to the student. Okay, the interpreter will do all the rest. That was it. When looking for roles for hearing students, pretty much all the students I've ever worked with, the approach is rather simple. Find employers that list an A+ certification as either a requirement or a highly desired qualification, entry level, forward the student's resume, and then, of course, wait for a response. It's turned out to be effective. And a certification, and we can go into the merits of a 2-year degree, a 4-year degree versus certifications. But in my line of work, the overwhelming majority of the individuals that I served did not have any formal education other than a high school diploma, which I think was a academic requirement for this course, right, Jim? They had to have at least a high school diploma. Okay, great. So here's the big question. And in some ways, working with a program called DeafTEC Ready sort of allowed me to skate through. And that is, do you advise a student, particularly for a role as a help desk technician, to disclose that they are deaf or hard of hearing? If you're a career services practitioner, you've probably come across this before. Do I disclose a disability? Again, lucky for me, when talking about a program called DeafTEC Ready, anyone that I engaged about this program already knew who we were trying to help. At the same time, and I was actually surprised by this because, like Jim showed you, the students had a great rapport with each other, the great camaraderie. They would have informal discussions about whether or not to disclose. And the opinions actually widely varied. Whereas some would say, yeah, I'm deaf. Okay, I have to put that on my resume. And then others would simply say, no, I wouldn't do it because in the past, when I have disclosed it, I have either been told that an interpreter cannot be provided for me, or somehow I've never heard from the employer after submitting my application. Another big question that I was asked was simply, do you think this will be difficult? And I was asked this question about week 6 into the program by one of our administrators. I said, yes. And I was a little surprised when she looked at me and she said, really? And to this day, I contend that working with the deaf and hard of hearing, rightly or wrongly, poses challenges up front, not only for the types of jobs that you're trying to find them, but also because of some barriers that they face historically and unfortunately to the present day. So what was my game plan? It was real simple. Reach out to past partners. For us at CompTIA, if you have students looking for jobs as a help desk technician, a desktop support analyst, and this is a lesson that I've learned over time, these jobs are generally found through major staffing agencies like Tech Systems, Apex Systems, Robert Half, Kelly Services. Another big one is Insight Global. For us at CompTIA, when it came to placing students into these positions, that was our quote unquote bread and butter. That'd be a disappointment to students that were new to tech because they would say, well, I want to work at IBM, I want to work at Apple, I want to work at Google. Unfortunately, many of these companies that we would call enterprise companies, they simply outsource these types of jobs because they would rather devote their HR talent acquisition bandwidth to other types of positions. So now you have to deal with staffing agencies. Other potential partners that you usually work with are what we call managed service providers or tech service providers. And these tend to be, let's say, mid-sized companies that sort of provide that outsourced resource for companies that really find it more efficient to outsource their help desk responsibilities to contractors. And yes, generally speaking, these types of roles tend to be of a contract nature. And that's tough for students sometimes because they think I've put in all this work, all this effort, and now I'm looking at perhaps an $18 to $20 an hour contract position without any benefits. So that adds another layer of complexity to placing any kind of student. But when you throw into the mix that someone from a staffing agency, a recruiter now has to convince a client, we just add one more layer that a deaf and hard of hearing student has to, I think, unfairly navigate. But let's give it a try. And this is all anecdotal. And as I said to Missy and Jim before the webinar began, the hard part is being honest, but at the same time, yeah, being honest without betraying any kind of confidence. So, as expected, initial conversations ranged from the typical, have them apply. We do not screen for any kind of disability. We have a wonderful statement on our website about inclusivity. And so, sure, okay, great, I'll have them do that. And then on the opposite end of the spectrum, or let's say the middle of the spectrum, was, that might be a little tough. It might be a little tough because they need to communicate. And in one instance, one of the students had an interview, but then the interview was canceled because our contact informed me that This student needed to be able to handle high pressure situations. And based on what I had shared with her, she felt it probably wouldn't be a good fit. And then all the way at the end, and I think anybody viewing can infer what the outcome was, I'd get the response saying, hey, can we talk off the record? So you kind of know where that conversation is going. Luckily, after 5 weeks, we had an early success. One of the students in New York City, and that's important, and I'll cover that a little bit later, was able to find a role as an ASL customer service representative at the flagship store for Samsung in New York City. So his role was basically to assist those who needed assistance, the deaf and hard of hearing customers, with tech support on the floor using ASL. So that was an early success. Setbacks. Setbacks often occur. The biggest setback for me was reaching out to employers, telling them a little bit about each student. And recruiters do this whenever they send candidates for review. A little spotlight. This is so and so. Here's the resume. This is why I think he or she would be a great candidate for you. And then receiving responses such as, this is wonderful. Where did you find this person? We would love to interview this person. Perfect. Only to find out from the student maybe a month later that no one ever got in contact. And that by far was the most commonly encountered setback throughout the placement piece. Employers giving really favorable, really encouraging responses, only to have nothing happen. This is my personal opinion. I would rather someone just tell me, even off the record, look, this isn't going to work. They need to talk, which is what I heard a couple of times. They need to be able to talk on the phone. Okay. So the breakthroughs, though, was the student that found a position at Samsung, and that was through a company, a staffing company called 2020 Companies. And that success led to another student being placed, this time through Dell as a product support specialist. And that student, who's actually in North Carolina, was at, I believe, a Best Buy store describing products to perhaps prospective deaf and hard of hearing customers. The major breakthrough, if I had to list one, was with a federal initiative called the Ability One program. The Ability One program was founded to do many things for individuals with a disability, but for us, the biggest benefit was many of the agencies part of this network. Let me see if I can bring that up. Can you all see Ability One Network? Many of these organizations listed here offer either vocational training or employment opportunities that actually prefer or give preference to individuals with a disability. So for me, this is like manna from heaven, finding out that there are hundreds of organizations in all 50 states solely devoted to helping individuals with a disability prepare for work. If you're in the disability employment space, you've probably heard of a major organization called Disability In. To me, that's like the gold standard, the platinum standard of disability-based hiring. And we had a wonderful chat. The backup, or rather the challenge, was the students could only participate in their initiatives if they were a rising junior or senior at a four-year college or university. And that simply did not encompass the student population that Jim and I work with. But if you're working with an individual with a disability, looking for any kind of employment opportunities, I would highly encourage you to give the Ability One Network a really close look. Where are we at now? Jim and I have persistently kept in touch with the students since the program ended officially, well, since graduation was August of 2022. 5 of the 12 students that completed the program have been placed. 3 have actually enrolled at a university to pursue studies related to IT and computer science. 2 are still actively searching, and I would say 2 are essentially out of the workforce. In terms of lessons learned, sure. The first one, and Jim, I think you'll agree with me on this, number one is to sort of, a major hiccup for us was finding out how much the Career Center at NTID could help a boot camp style program. Because officially, if I remember correctly, we weren't an RIT program. So the only students that could have been helped were anyone who was an alum of the university. And I think at the end it got straightened out, but had it been straightened out a little sooner, I think we would have been able to reach a few more employers. Another lesson learned earlier when I mentioned the student in New York being one of the first to find an employment opportunity, the location is significant. More IT jobs tend to be found in more, let's say, populous areas. Still, looking back, I wouldn't have had it any other way. I think it would have been wrong to not let a student in simply because of geography, but it does play a role when it comes to hiring. Personally, for me, another lesson learned would have been a little more awareness of ASL or even SimCom, or even some of the apps that I learned how to use from the students to communicate. And then finally, this program, at least, I don't know, I think it came together a little quickly. I was working with other classes when I was asked to work with this program, which I cheerfully volunteered for. But if we had a little more lead time to sort of enlist employer partners and not just seek out those that hired our hearing students on a regular basis, I think that could have been a helpful factor as well. So there's the lessons to be learned. And to this day, there's some ongoing efforts. So, Jim, how about you? About your recent efforts to engage employers? How's that been going?
Oh, pretty well. One of the 11, the last ones to get certified, has been a laborer for Amazon. And out here in California, I went out and visited him. And when I visited with his trainer, it was very evident that they really didn't know his background. They have a program there where they take people that are on the floor and teach them how to troubleshoot. Like, let's say if a thermal printer is broken or something like that. And then they get some skills and then they put them in a pool to be selected for IT. And Arthur's been advocating for himself for a while. When I went out there and talked to him and told him about the boot camp and what his credentials are, they're like, we had no idea. We need to get Arthur. Let's get his resume updated. Let's get him into this pool to get into an entry level IT position. And it's what, because Arthur was trying to go through the IT manager who manages like 6 different areas. And so he didn't have much success. Basically, he was going to the wrong person and just needed some help. When I said, I'm talking to these 3 people from Amazon with Arthur there, I'm speaking and using SimCom, they were like really excited. They're like, wow, this is really great. Yeah, we should do this. So I think, email can only do so much, Anderson. I think really it just needed to have a presence. I just needed to show up and talk to the people and show them what we're doing, basically. And so plan to do more of that.
Is there, if there's one takeaway you'd like anyone viewing this webinar to take away, what would you say it is?
It shouldn't be a bear. In many cases, the disability, deaf and hard of hearing, should not be an issue. Yeah, they can't talk on the phone, but so many IT positions use ticket systems and
Mhm.
people texting, and you saw the apps that it doesn't have to be the barrier that people think it is. And it's just get the word out to the gatekeepers of the companies. That would be my one thing.
Yeah. Similarly, I would say when trying to find employment opportunities,
Yeah,
reminding individuals of the ADA is not likely to get you very far, unpopular as that may seem.
yeah, that's employment. As far as training and getting them certified, I think good teaching, I mean, obviously we're setting this up for deaf and hard of hearing. Good teaching is good teaching. If you do something that's good for a deaf or hard of hearing person, it's good for the hearing person. I had many wonderful conversations with Jeff Mell that teaches for CompTIA, and good teaching is good teaching. It doesn't matter who your audience is. I think it works for everyone. So those would be my two takeaways.
Awesome. With that said, we'll leave the remaining couple of minutes for any questions. We're happy to take them.
You may
But
want to
if,
unshare there. You may want to
yeah,
unshare, Anderson.
but if,
There we go. Now I can see everybody.
but we understand that this is a resource that is mostly viewed after. So on that note, Jim, unless you have anything, Missy, I'm very grateful for, I was just beyond surprised in a good way when you asked me to come back. So
Of
thank
course,
you.
thank you. Like I said, after your presentation at our conference, we had such amazing feedback. So we are so glad you could be here today. And I apologize, I was saying the name of your company wrong. I was saying
Oh,
CompTIA.
it's all good. Oh, it's
CompTIA.
all good.
But yeah, no, this is amazing technology, and we are glad to have you with us, and thank you again. So we are just about out of time, but we will put this up on our website. So thank you both for being here. Thank you, and hopefully we'll be in touch soon.
Our
Okay, thanks,
pleasure.
Missy.
Thank you.
Have a
Thanks,
great day.
Anderson.
Thank you,
Okay,
Tim.
bye-bye.